My name's Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. And I'm a member of the South Dixie Virtual Group, and it's good to be here with you guys. And this was like a short one. This is like only an hour from where I come from, but I was doing Boca for 12 weeks, like 2 hours. Whoa. And I literally fall asleep on the way up here doing 90. And I have that, one of the first things I remember one of my mentors used to say to me, I'd go up to him and I'd be, doing what young alcoholics do, talking 78 RPM. These days, this is one of the problems with growing old because I say 78 RPM and you know what that means, but most of these guys don't know what I mean. They've never seen an LP record, and, they come up to me and they're going 78 RPM about something that happened to them in their life or whatever it is. And while I was doing that, and he'd say, Russell, and he'd quote the Bible. He'd say, be still and know that I am God. Be still and that. And then later on, as I got a little bit older, and he'd say, Russell, be still, and I'd say, and then finally after a while he would just say, just be, you know what I mean? And now you see what happens is if you don't drink and you go to meetings, you get to a point where be still. I mean, that's where I'm at. You just be still. You don't have to do anything. You just don't want to move. And this guy one day went up to me. We were doing a meeting. Where were we? We're doing something.
We were in Boca.
And I was on stage just before the meeting. And I was in deep meditation. I was taking a nap before the meeting, and he came up to me. He says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure. What is it?" He says, "You ever meditate?" I said, "Yeah, I meditate." He said, "When do you meditate?" I said, "When I'm not talking to you." And that's a true story. So if it looks like I'm napping anytime during the meeting, it's not napping, it's deep meditation. Prayer and meditation, I'm just meditating. The deepest form of meditation. And so I haven't found it necessary to take a drink. I'm in my 45th year. I haven't found it necessary to take a drink, and you can tell by looking at me, I've been somewhere for 45 years. I mean, I'm 76 years of age, and haven't found us to take a drink since January 25th, 1981. Right. So it's good to be here. So we'll talk a little bit about something. I think I'm going to have a first step in there somewhere. Bill Wilson wrote the Big Book in 1939. It was published in He had like 3.5 years sobriety. Before he wrote the Big Book, all they did was read the Bible. If you read Dr. Bob, the Good Old Timers, which I encourage you to read, so you can find out what AA is really about. You need to find out about Founders AA. What happens is when you get old, you get opinionated. Well, when you're young, you're opinionated. And so there's nothing wrong with being opinionated. You just have a bunch of bullshit opinions, But hopefully if you get old, you've been around here for 45 years, you have opinions, but it's usually based on watching people drink or kill themselves or stuff like that, or just going through life and going through hard times. You get that change of perspective, right? How do we get a change of perspective? By repeated humiliations and the final crushing of ourselves. So the only thing that 45 years means is that I've been crushed a little bit more than somebody with 20 years. You know what I mean? The crushing is what changes you. You're sort of walking around. You're what do they say when you're gliding? You're resting on your laurels and you're headed for trouble. You do, but you don't think you're headed for trouble. And then somebody takes away all your money, or your wife leaves you, or you get cancer, or something happens, and all of a sudden you thought you had it all together, and you go to shit, and then you're down, and then you're not such a big shot, and then you're worried, and you're a thumb-sucking crybaby, and you got 10 years, and all of a sudden you got to do a game changer. You either drink or you change your game. And you probably run into somebody, they tell you to go to church, or they tell you to do something you don't want to do. But you're so scared, you got no place else to go, because don't drink and go to meetings doesn't work, because you're not drinking and going to meetings, and you want to blow your brains out. So you end up doing what they're told to do, and your whole life changes. And then you're wonderful again. until you start coasting and resting on laurels and playing God, and then all of a sudden, the cancer comes back, or the IRS, audits you, or something happens and you go crazy. And so the only thing that 45 years means is that I've had 45 years of repeated humiliations and crushing of my self-sufficiency. And that sort of like fine-tunes you. It fine-tunes you, where and what happens is you get fine-tuned enough, you start dealing with the real problem, because you don't even know what the real problem is. You really don't know what that's okay. It's standard, your brain's all befuddled. You don't know what the real. So I can tell you this, I'm not going to tell you anything. None of this may apply to you. I got some weird shit. I'm going to hand out some shit you're not going to hear in some other places. But that thing that they say in the big book, where they say you lose fear of people and economic insecurity? Yeah. That thing where you worry about what other people think. You worry about what other people think about you. You can always see alcoholics worry about what people think about them. I know that because I'm an alcoholic and I've worked with a lot of alcoholics. And we don't tell people we worry about what other people think about it. We live a life in bondage to fear of what people are going to think about us. We don't know we're like that, because when you've been like that all your life, you don't know you're like that, because you're just like that. And you hang around people that are like that. So you don't know about it until you mess up and you go crazy and you get some sponsor that you respect, and he's sort of like somehow if one of my sponsors through sarcasm, let you know, they say, well, you're going to do the meeting tonight, Russell. I says, and you say, well, I'm not really ready to do that. I said, oh, you're scared. Oh, I didn't say that. I said, I'm just not ready. I said, no. Say, I'm scared to do the meeting because I'm going to screw up and people are going to laugh at me. Why don't you tell the truth? You see, that's how you learn about it. You learn about shit like that. Like a guy will come in your office. And he'll talk about how he's worried about this and he's worried about that, and he doesn't know what's going to happen to his job, and he doesn't know what's going to happen to his wife, and he'll just talk for 15 minutes about how worried he is. And I'll say, oh yeah, I understand what your problem. We can fix that. He says, yeah. He says, yeah, you're just scared. You're afraid. You have fear. He says, no, I didn't say that. I'm just worried. He says, I said, that's another word for fear. You see, that's how bright we are. You see, we don't even understand half the time what we're talking about. It's all about fear, the corrosive thread. So Bill Wilson wrote this book called the books that they read were the books that they found, the old timers found. I call them the founders, because that's what I deal with these days, something called founders sobriety. So I read all that conference approved stuff. You know what conference approved? There's no conference disapproved. Did you know that? People use that to try to keep you in an AA box. They try to keep you in a box so you don't grow up and do 6-step and become an adult. They keep you in a box. Oh, well, that's not conference approved. Well, fella, I don't know how to explain this to you. But back in the good old days when they were really doing this thing, all they read was conference not. You know what conference approved means? It means AA publishes it so they make money off of it. There's nothing conference disapproved. But they use it these days to keep people sick. But, that's just my opinion. You don't have to believe me. I want you to discover this shit on your own the way I discovered it. You'll discover it when you get to be about 10 or 15 or 20 years sober, and you'll discover when you keep on drinking, you don't know what's going on because you're going on. You'll discover when you're about 20 years sober and you got cancer and you got no place to go. And whenever you go to a meeting, all they're talking about is not drinking and going to meetings, and you're not drinking and you're going to meetings and you're scared shitless, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're worried about losing your house and you're worried about a child dying or something. You'll discover them, and you'll start saying, well, where am I going to go now? And maybe you'll go to a psychiatrist. He'll give you some Xanax or something to chew on or something like that to fix you up, and then you'll end up drinking again, and you'll say, what's the answer? And you'll remember that what Dr. Jung, one of the greatest psychiatrists in the world, said to Roland Hazard. He said the answer is God. It's not hidden. It's not hidden. It's just that alcoholics don't want to do that. You just learn stuff. You just learn Bill Wilson writes this book. So the books that Bob said were absolutely essential were 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and the Book of James. So that's the Bible. He said He said, what's this first things first? That's something Dr. Bob quoted. He said, Dr. Bob said, that means seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. They said, well, what's this program all about? He says, read the Bible. That's Dr. Bob. If you don't believe that, you got to read Dr. Bob and Good Old Timers. That's what he said. But we'll get into more of that later. But in any event, so he writes this book called The Big Book, Alcoholics Anonymous. He's got 3.5 years. Now listen, I believe the Big Book was divinely inspired. I don't put down the Big Book. I got sober on the Big Book from the 12 and 12 and all that sort of stuff. So don't make this sound. Don't mistake what I'm saying for somebody who's saying it's no good or anything like that. All that stuff is good. It's good. But what you find out is A is like a giant funnel. Everybody comes in. Crazy people, psychos, atheists, agnostics. But you guys ever seen a funnel? You see, what happens is it gets narrower and narrower, and then all of a sudden it becomes a narrow way. And you go to these, I get to go to these conventions, speak at some of these convention things, and they do these things called countdowns. You guys ever seen a countdown where they start saying who's the oldest guy there and who's the youngest, and they go, how many people have 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? And you got 50,000 people or 1,000 people or 3,000 people, and everybody's sober. Everybody's sober. Maybe how many people have 5 years? 100 people stand up. How many people got 60, 70, 100, 200, 300 people? And then they say, okay, they get around 20 years, 25 years. How many people? And 3 people stand up. 26, 2 people stand up. 27, nobody. 28, nobody. 29, 1 guy. 30, nobody. 31, nobody. 32, nobody. They go 33, 34, 1 person, another person. You know what I mean? And they say, then there's 1 guy who stands up, he's got like 45 or 50 years, you know what I mean? He says, where are they? They all died of heart attacks? And you realize, you start realizing that every time you hear somebody in the room say, I've been around AA for 30 years. Or they say this, he says, well, I had 3 years and then I had 6 years and then I had 5 years. Or you see somebody with what you might term as long-term sobriety with 10 years pick up a white chip or 20 years pick up you start realize that you never really keep count of those people. You only look at the people that are staying sober. And then you start realizing that all this stuff you've been seeing over the time with people picking up again, or maybe committing suicide or stuff like that, it counts. And you start realizing that there reaches a point in Alcoholics Anonymous where if it's just about don't drink and going to meetings and just about doing the steps and just about intensive work with other alcoholics, that has a half-life. Because you start reading the sentences in the Big Book. How's this for a sentence? There is one that has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. That's a sentence. Is that a sentence? What do you think they meant by that? There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Here's a sentence for you. If the better philosophy of life would have solved our problems, we'd be sober a long time ago, but they didn't solve our problems. We had to find the power by which we could live. And therefore we had to talk about God, of course. And he says, here's the problem with alcoholics, atheists, and agnostics. Because alcoholics have a problem with God. And when they say that thing about there is one who has all power, that one is God, you know what they do after that? They talk about here's the how and why of it. Not only do we have to stop playing God, making decisions for ourselves and not following God, or trying to do what the 6th step says. The 6th step says grow in the image and likeness of God. We have to actually do that stuff unless you want to remain in the spiritual kindergarten. You got to do that. That means you've got to do what they say in the, you know what they say in, what he said in the last page of the Big Book? He says, we know but a little. You have 3.5 years, no, not but a little. It's Bill Wilson. He says, God will reveal to you. See to your relationship with him is right. Then it says on the last page, he says, but we won't know you, Bill. We won't know you or Bob. What are we going to do? He says, that's not important. He says, God will determine that. Your real reliance must be on him. He'll show you how to create the fellowship you crave. It's probably a godly fellowship. And then you'll get to join something called the Fellowship of the Spirit. I mean, you may think that's the Fellowship of AA. It's not the Fellowship of AA. This ain't, I don't know how to explain this to you. This ain't Well People's Anonymous. If you haven't figured that out, you haven't been to enough meetings. You haven't sponsored enough people, you know? There's another fellowship somewhere around here. It's actually out there, too. It's called the Fellowship of the Spirit. Now, you have to believe any of this. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just telling you my experience. This is what you learn a lot. You learn a lot if you've been around a while, you know? It's like that guy in that Farmers commercial. We know a lot because we've seen a lot. You hear all the bullshit. You hear all the, you know, like Bill Wilson said, Bill Wilson said in the big book, he said, you know what he said? It's right there. You can look at it. He says here and there, once in a while, a former drinker said, comes to AA, he says, feel better, look better, having a better time. He says, we laugh at that shit. We laugh at that salad. We know he's going to try the old game again because he's not happy. I never understood that. Guy comes to AA, stops drinking, says, I feel better, I look better. And why would you say we laugh at that stuff? You know, I didn't understand. That sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? And then I started sponsoring people who came for about 3 weeks or a month or 2 months saying how great they're doing, how wonderful they're doing. And then they'd come back and they'd miss meetings and they'd be drinking. And you start realizing that that's what they saw. They saw people that would get sober and then they drink again. And they would say how great they're feeling. They drink again. And the guys that were doing terrible, who were coming to AA because they said, I needed a meeting, doing terrible, they were doing okay. You know? So he says in the book, he says, what does he say? He says, feel better, look better, we're having a better time, we laugh at such Sally. We know he will try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll know loneliness as few do. He'll wish for the end. He'll be at the jumping off place. That's what Bill Wilson said in 3.5 years. And that's what he prophesied in 3.5 years. 20 years later, when he was 23 years sober, he was going down the tubes. The conference met when he had 15 years. The oldest guy at the conference was Bill Wilson. He had 15 years. Everybody else had less than 15 years. You guys ever been to a business meeting? Imagine a business meeting where nobody has more than 15 years. Bill Wilson had 15 years. I ain't putting him down, but I'm just telling you the truth. 2 years later, he was sucking on LSD. He went to a doctor just to experiment whether that would help him. Hey, listen, I've been around long enough for some of my best friends. They're not feeling good, so they just go to our famous psychiatrist, and he says, well, I know what your problem is. It's not narcotic. Don't worry, it won't do you. Try some of this Xanax shit or whatever the heck. I don't even know. What are they pushing these days? I don't know what they're pushing these. They're pushing something. They got some sort of pill that'll help you. Roland Hazard went to Dr. Young, one of the greatest psychiatrists in the world at that time. Roland Hazard, he drank again after going, he says, I can't help you. This is what the greatest psychiatrist, we don't have too many Dr. Youngs around. Dr. Young said, hey, you can check on this. It's in our book. It's just a sentence. You got to just read it. He says, I can't help you. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never been able to help somebody when that state of mind exists. And he said, well, what do I do? He says, you have to have God's help. And he says, listen, is there no hope? He says, here and there, once in a while. These things, we call them phenomena. That's a scientific word for miracle. We call them miracles, phenomena. But that's what you have to do, and that's what he did, and it worked for him. And it worked for me. We're always looking for the easy road out. And then, so Bill Wilson got past the LSD thing. He never drank again, you know? And what I give him credit for is about 3 or 4 years later, he started going down the tubes with depression, and he was going nuts and everything. He writes about it in a volume, that essay that most people do not read. It's called The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. You ought to read that thing, see what he has to say. And you know what he says? He says, I've noticed that, and he had about 21 years at the time. He says, I've noticed that many of our old timers, he calls them oldsters, who have successfully managed the booze cure. Booze is enough for youngsters. Booze is another name for alcohol. In other words, they got through the booze cure. They're sober. They're picking up those medallions. 21 years and have medallions. Still lack emotional sobriety. In other words, at 3.5 years without knowing it, he was saying, I notice He said there will come a time in alcoholic's life, he'll have no defense against first drink, has to come from God. And he says, the way he said is, he says, you'll find, an alcoholic will find that he will get to the point where he won't be happy with his sobriety. And, you can get really heady about this thing when you got 3 years or 5 years, 10 years, you're not drinking, you're going to all these conventions and you're helping all these people. And it's all a good thing, because that's what happened to me, Mr. AA, traveling around and everything. But I'll tell you something, you get about 20 years or 21 years and life starts hitting you, and, because I'll tell you something, AA is great. Something? Life never stops. The hits never stop coming. I don't care how long you're sober, even 45. You know something? There's always something and that goes 24/7. 24/7 it comes at you. And there's only so many meetings you can go to, and so many people you can sponsor before one day, you're not paying attention, you're looking someplace else, and all of a sudden here comes the IRS, and there goes your bank account. And here comes, I like when they come in threes. The IRS, your bank account, your wife leaves you, and you forgot your fucking password. You know what I mean? And that's it. Time for a drink, you know what I mean? They're going nuts, and yeah, you're laughing now. You don't know what it's like. You'll see a few years from now when you're sucking on the muzzle of a gun, you'll say, I used to laugh at that idiot Russell. I know what it's all about, what the deal is. And you'll learn about what this alcoholism is all about. You'll learn about this deal, and so Bill Wilson actually started experiencing at 21 years that which he wrote when he had 3.5 years. And you know what he said? He said, we got these old timers. We got me and everything, and I'm going nuts. And I wrote the book. And don't you think I know how to do a 4th step and a 5th step? Don't you think I wrote the book and I can't figure it out? You got to read that thing. You know what he says? He says, I got it all wrong. He said, I got it all wrong. That's got to make you feel good after you've been reading this book and worshiping Bill Wilson, all your life. And then all of a sudden he writes this thing and says, I got it all wrong. And what he says is, he said, I got it all wrong. Dr. Bob knew that, because Dr. Bob was one of these guys. He was into the deal. You know what the last words Dr. Bob said to Bill Wilson was? The last words. He said, Bill, because he used to talk to him all the time. Dr. Bob was solid. He said, Bill, let's not screw this thing up. Keep it simple. It's a simple thing. Trust God. There is one who has all power. That one is God. So you can do this. You can do the 12. You can do all 12 steps if you don't get the one thing. If you don't get the one thing, you're going to be out. No, what does it say? God is essential. God is either everything or he's nothing. That's a sentence, He's everything or he's nothing. There is no middle of the road solution or any of that stuff. I'm just going to point out to you that some of that stuff is there. If you find yourself, you got 5 years, you like 6 years, you got 20 years, you got 25 years, and you're not happy with yourself, and you're still not happy. It's like that old song. Remember the song, Is That All There Is? Just don't drink and go to meetings. Almost sounds like a sentence. Almost like you're a lifer. Don't drink and go to meetings. Just do all this and you'll do okay. In other words, all you have to do is do the work and everything will work out. What if you do all the work and it doesn't work out? So you learn a lot. Let me tell you something. You learn around the 10 years I hit a second bottom and I had to do, you learn a lot. Bill Wilson, where did he write he wrote the thing about emotional sobriety, which is what I like to talk about the most. You'll hear about that. When he had 23 years. It was published in 1959 in the Grapevine. So it's conference approved, by the way. You know what he said? He said, but I see that some people beat this thing, get rocketed in the fourth dimension. It works for them. And he called them, you know what he called those people? The benighted ones. He said, perhaps, listen to this is the statement Bill Wilson made. If you liked them at 3.5 years, he said, perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in Alcoholics Anonymous. Did you guys read the book on about the next major development? Yeah, you're going to have to figure that out on your own. You got to figure that out on your own. You got to understand census to figure out what the next major development in AA. I pray that Bill Wilson got it. You know, he sure hinted at it, but he didn't come right out and say it. But he said the next one. I'll tell you what he did say. He said, you know what my problem was? Dependency. I depended too much on people, places, things, and I depended too much on Alcoholics Anonymous. I got so enamored with Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, did you know how they say, they talk about organized religion? You know, did you know that for many people, AA is like religious? It's like a religion. It's a religion, but not necessarily one that believes in God. Not a religion that has a God. It's a religion. You figure out your own deal. It sort of leaves you there. That's not the way they did it in the old days. But hell, I just digress. So let's talk about the first step, shall we? So listen, you learn a lot between 1 year and 10 years, don't you? I mean, you guys have been around. Some of you guys have been around for a while. You know, if I said, you know, so Regina, how much time do you have?
3 years.
So you have 3 years. Do you think you've learned a lot in the last 3 years? I mean, if I was to look at you and ask you questions or see your brain at 1 month, do you think you learned a lot? You changed and you see things differently when you had like 6 months from 1 month? What about from 6 months to 2 years? What about from 2 years to 3 years? You think you've learned? Really? Like every day, right? Would you want to go back to 1 month? No, you don't want to go back there. But when you had 1 month, you were feeling good, right? But now you got 3 years. But you don't want to go. You want to go back? How about like you want to go back 3 months ago? No, you don't. You want to. You have it. So I wonder what you're going to be like in 3 more years. What about 10 more years? What about 30 more years? What about 40 more years? You know, you learn a lot. You see a lot. You know, things happen to you. You know, one of the things you got to, in order to change an alcoholic and alcoholic, you need 2 things. Number 1, you need an alcoholic. You got to start off with an alcoholic. That's like the recipe. Number 2, you need the steps. You need the fellowship. You need all this stuff we have. We surround ourselves. And then you know what you need? You need time in the oven. You got to take that cake, you know what I mean? You got to put all the ingredients in there and you got to throw them in the oven and turn it up to 350 degrees for 40 years. Now I know what you want to do. You want to throw it in the oven and turn it up to 10,000 degrees for 6 seconds, you know, to sort of rush the process. But then we just get crispy, you know what I mean? It doesn't work that way. You got to put in the time. So that's the deal. So what is this about? So my idea is, if you asked me about the first step years ago, you know, I would say something like this, because I've heard this said in meetings. I believe that's true. I believe it's true. I would say, you know, there comes a time, if you're an alcoholic, there comes a time in your life where you pass over an invisible line, where you weren't drinking alcoholically. You understand what I'm saying? You weren't drinking alcoholically, but you pass over this line. You can't see it as you're passing over it, but sometimes you can look back and you can see that line. You know what I mean? You can see that line. And you say, man, that's when I passed over that line. You know? And you say, and then I passed over the line from non-alcoholic drinking into alcoholic drinking. You understand what I'm saying? You see that line. That's what I would have told you. Then a few years later down the road, I would have said, well, you know, I think I passed over that line when I took my first drink. And that would have been true for me then. I would have said I passed over my line when I took my first drink. And now I know I passed over that line when I was born. Because my concept of what alcoholism is different. It's changed. Because now that line in the big book where it says drinking is only a symptom. Is only a symptom of the disease. The real disease centers in our mind. So here's the deal. So my mom was an alcoholic. She was horrible. She was a bad alcoholic. I loved my mom, but I also hated my mom. And I swore I was 14 years old, 13 years old, and I swear I would never be like my mom. Drunk all the time. Lying out on the front lawn in the middle of daylight in her negligee, you know, and I'd never be like my mom. I was not going to drink like my mom. I was not going to drink. But what do you do if you're weird? I know what I did. I had a drink. I drank a Colt 45 malt liquor and got laid. That's what happened to me. You know what I mean? It was off to the races. That was me. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. Let's do it this way. Let me just tell you the truth. You ever say to yourself, if I only had this, whatever this is, a new girlfriend, a new boyfriend, you know, a new toy, a motorcycle, whatever, what is going on over here? I mean, really.
Keep going.
Keep going. Keep going. I feel like I'm in Grand Central Station here.
So you keep hitting the table, and it shows up on the recording.
Oh, so now it's my fault?
Aren't you an alcoholic? I think everything's your fault.
You ever wake up in the morning or say to yourself, if I only had this one thing, everything would be perfect? And you think about that one. You ever do that? You ever do that? You know, I used to do that. I'll bet I did that when I was 13. Man, if I only had that bicycle, I'd be okay. If I only got this for Christmas, I'd be okay. You ever feel sorry for yourself? I can't believe this is always happening to me. This bullshit always happens. You ever do that? You know, I did that when I've done that all my life. I'm not sure, quite frankly, emotionally, I'm not talking about intellectually. I got smarter and smarter and smarter school-wise, academically, you know what I mean? I got more degrees that can possibly imagine that proves that I've been educated far beyond my capacity to know anything, okay? But I mean, I knew everything, but that's all I knew. I didn't know how to keep a marriage together. I didn't know how not to cheat on my wife. I didn't know how to be a decent person. I didn't know how to treat everybody like they have a broken heart, because they probably do. I didn't know how to love people. I didn't even know what love was. But, you know, I mean, you have that thing like you feel sorry for you know, you're feeling sorry for you. Why is this always happening to me? You ever envy anybody else? You ever jealous of anybody else? You ever say, you ever talk to yourself? You ever tell yourself you're so wonderful and you're so great and nobody appreciates you? How about you ever tell yourself you're a piece of shit and you might as well kill yourself? You ever do that? You ever find yourself all of a sudden? You ever find yourself like in the car and all of a sudden you hear this voice? You're such an asshole. You're never going to understand this stuff. You're such a jerk. You're such a phony. You ever have this voice, you know, telling you bad things about yourself and other people? I mean, you could turn on TV and you could text, you could do all the shit we do to ignore it, but you ever have this constant voice somehow where you're second guessing yourself? The teacher says, does anybody have a question? You have a question because you don't understand it, but you don't raise your hand because what if it's a stupid question and people laugh at you? Anybody have the answer? And you have the answer, but you don't necessarily raise your hand because what if you're wrong? You ever worry about what people think about you? Or what they're going to think about you? Or what they did think about you? You ever tell yourself, I don't give a shit what everybody thinks. I don't care what they think about. You ever tell yourself over and over again you don't care what they think about you? You ever say it out loud? You ever turn to yourself, you know something? I don't give a shit what they think about me. You ever have a couple drinks and say that, you know? Listen, let me tell you what I found out. This is in my own life. People that are constantly telling themselves they don't care what other people think about them, all they do is think about what other people think about them. That's a bondage worse than drinking alcohol. Alcohol, worst will happen is you'll die, or you'll kill somebody else, you go to jail. But living a life where you're always second-guessing yourself, you're always worried about what other people think about, you're always trying to conform to other people, you're always trying to whore yourself out to the world like a whore, never wanting to be your own man because you're always looking to see what everybody's looking at and what they want, always worried about what you're going to say in AA because you don't want to mention God saying because you know somebody's going to say you're killing newcomers, you know. Always worried about, you know, that kind of stuff. That's not sobriety. You know what that is? That's bullshit. I've lived that entire life, all my life. I didn't come in here to live that life. For 2/3 of my life, I'm 76 years old, I've lived that way. I ain't living the last third of my life that way. This is about being rocked in the fourth dimension of existence, experiencing much of heaven and knowing peace. How about that deal? How about knowing peace? How about experiencing much of heaven? What's that all about? You know what that's all about? I don't know. So let me tell you, so here's the deal. All those thoughts and 50 more that I haven't even said about the anger and about the lust and about the envy, you know, about the pride, the false pride, and all the stuff, you know, that goes through your brain. And you know, the other thing about alcohol, you can't stop thinking, can you? You ever say to yourself, I got to stop thinking about this crap. This thing is driving me crazy. You ever say to yourself, I got to stop thinking about this crap. You know, maybe it's money. I'm worried about the 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 money. He says, I got to stop thinking about this stuff. You say, it's not putting a dime in my bag. I got to stop thinking about this stuff. And then for 2 nanoseconds, you stop thinking about it. Then you start thinking about it again. You ever find you can't stop thinking about it? You ever find that you're always thinking about bad things about yourself and other people? You ever find yourself populated with people? You ever cross the street because you see something and somebody and you hope they don't see you because you want to? You ever rip up your mail before you open up the envelope? You ever look at your phone to see who's calling you because and you don't answer it because you don't want to speak to them? You ever do? That's just the tip of the frickin' iceberg. Now, let me tell you what the deal is with that. I thought those things a decade before I started drinking. That's my thought process. Years before I had my first drink. You know why I drank? Because no woman, no car, no amount of money, no new suit of clothes, no haircut, no Botox, no nothing ever worked quite as well and quite as fast as just a few drinks. Not that other stuff doesn't work, by the way. Money works. I spent more money I don't have buying shit I don't need to impress people I don't even like and make me so that I'd be accepted and they'd think I'm great. You know, I spent more time worrying about losing this or losing that. I spent more time saying if I had that car, I'd be okay, and I'd get the car and like a year later, I mean, I have a scratch in the car and it would cost $300 to fix. And I had to fix it because it was driving me nuts because I'm driving around with a scratch car and I don't have any money. All I have is that $300, but I'll spend it on the scratch because I'm worried about what people will think about me with a scratch in my car. You know what I mean? That's what alcohol, that's, you know, that you say, here's the deal. So and if alcohol did for me, what it did for me when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 25, I'd still be drinking it. But alcohol stopped working for me. It stopped working for me. And the sad thing about my life is it stopped working for me about 10 years before I realized it stopped working for me. And I hurt a lot of people. I hurt a lot of people. I broke a lot of people's hearts, and I hurt myself, but I hurt a lot of people. And so I don't drink it anymore. So I stopped drinking the alcohol, which is a symptom of my disease. And then you know what took over? The disease. The thing that was bothering me when I was 5 years old, when I was 10 years old, when I was 13 years old. The thinking. The thinking doesn't stop. Everything in AA, the meetings, knowing people, getting sponsors, is all about putting a Band-Aid on and somehow stopping you from committing suicide, from killing yourself. When somebody comes to a meeting, that you ever say, man, I needed that meeting and mean it? You ever run to a meeting because you really need a meeting? Well, let me ask you this. You're not drinking, right? Why the hell do you need a meeting? Why do you need a meeting? See, people never look beyond the obvious. They think picking up a chip or doing this or doing that, and maybe they feel better for 5 minutes or something like that. They never ask themselves, why do I need to do this stuff? And you need to do this shit because you have alcoholism. And if you stop drinking, it doesn't even come close to stopping the alcoholism because it centers in your mind, not your body. And Dr. Young was right. He says, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never been able to solve that problem. That's why you keep on drinking. Not because you don't drink because you crave alcohol. You see, the craving is real. The obsession is real. The craving is real. Once you have that first drink, you got to have another one, another one, another one. But before you took that first drink, you ready for this? You weren't drinking. It's not because you crave alcohol. It's because you're fucking insane. You're crazy. Which, by the way, brings me to another point. Right after you realize that, then you get into something called the second step. And I think it has something to do with being restored to sanity. Did I get that right? Because I am old and I have dementia. I think they then start talking about the insanity. And some people get upset because you tell them they're insane because they don't believe it's that bad. And if you're an alcoholic, you're crazy. And you can deal with that step. You can deal with the step. You know, they say the one thing you have to do 100% is the first step. They tell you stuff like that. I think it works. I think it helps. You know, it makes the importance. Here it is. So what do I do when I see a guy with 30 years pick up a white chip? What do I do with the guy who started the car room when from back of the room he walks up and he picks up a white chip because after 30 years he drank? I say something stupid because I had only 5 years. Oh, that guy obviously didn't do the first step. Guy with 30 years started the car room, did steps. Obviously, he didn't do the first. Man, I wish that was the truth. I wish the stuff that they tell you was the truth. You're going to learn what the truth is. I mean, if all it was doing the first step 100%, you don't even need a big book. You need a bumper sticker. You know what I mean? You're going to find there's a lot more to this disease. It feeds on people who think they've done the first step and that's all they need to do. Or they think they've done a good fourth step and that's all they need to do. It feeds on people. This is a 12-step program. You know what the 12-step program is designed to do? Well, if you read the book, if you sort of get it, it says there is one that has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Now. Not 20 years from now, not 30 years from now, but now. And then they say, this is the how and why, but this is how we do it. We do these steps. The steps are designed to get you to the point where God becomes the central fact of your life. Not only does it become the central fact, this is what's called the great fact in AA. Not only does it become the central fact of your life, because these are the two things you have to have, the great fact, and the great fact is this and nothing less. It's nothing less than this, that God is the central fact of your life, and you are convinced. You're not unsure about this. You are absolutely convinced that he lives in your heart and mind in a way that is miraculous, doing for you what you can't do for yourself. And by the way, kids, that isn't my opinion. That's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so what does it profit a man? What does it profit a person if he does all the steps semi-perfectly and he's got the steps and I did them 5 times if he doesn't believe in God? If his life doesn't center on God. When the whole reason you worship the hammer, I mean, you build the house with the hammer and the nails and the saw, and you build the house, and then you spend the rest of your life worshiping the hammer. What does it mean? What happens to you where your life is all, you know what happens to you when you don't believe in God? You get sober, and you know what happens? You start making your own decisions and come to your own decision about yourself. You don't need any help. You don't need to ask other people. You certainly don't hang around those God people, you understand? Because every alcoholic knows that if you're an alcoholic, they have this antipathy about God. You hate God. That's why in the big book, by the way, they say we lose prejudice, even against all prejudice, even against organized religion. But we know that's not true in AA. Because if you start talking about God like I talk about God, somebody's going to come up to you and sort of pound you and say, Don't be talking about that crap. You're going to hurt people. You're going to kill people. You know, I don't know whether you guys know this, but in 1937, 35, 36, 37, 38, and 39, you couldn't go to a meeting unless you got on your knees in front of everybody who's already in AA and gave your life to God. Did you know that? Did you know that's what, it wasn't no white chip stuff. It wasn't no, well, pick up the white chip. Oh, and if you're shy, we'll put it over here and you can come at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, that wasn't AA. AA was you go into a room and you get on your knees in front of everybody who's already in AA and you give your life to God. And well, you probably say, well, some people probably didn't go. You're probably right. The meetings were probably a little different, don't you think? You probably didn't have those guys in the back of the room saying, well, if they had told me to do this, I would have left. You know what I mean? You didn't have those guys there. Now, I'm not putting down AA the way it is right now. I'm just telling you that I was brought into AA the way it is sort of like now. You know, I mean, when I came there, 45 years ago. So it's been around for 90 years. So, you know, it had already been watered down. It had already been pasteurized, homogenized, sterilized so that nobody would get offended and nobody would get upset. I like what Clarence, the brewmaster, said when Bob Smith 12-stepped him. And he said, the first question was, do you believe in God, one young fellow? And he says, what does that have to do with it? And Dr. Bob said, everything. He says, well, I guess. He says, guess nothing. You either believe in God or you don't. And he says, okay, I do. He says, great. Get down off the hospital bed. Get on your knees. And we're going to say a prayer. I don't know how to pray. I guess you don't. You just do what I tell you to do. And you know what Clarence said? This great line. It's in Dr. Bob in the Good Old Times. He said, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. And I'll tell you something. If you can't tell an alcoholic what to do to his face, you have no business sponsoring an alcoholic. Because all you're doing is you're going to lead them to disaster. Because I'm going to tell you something. I don't give a shit what alcoholics say about don't tell me what to do. You know, I do. This is my program. You do. Let me tell you what. You know what alcoholics really need? Direction. You know what they come here for? Direction. If you can't give somebody direction, you know what that means about you? It means you may think you're helping them. What it means is you're scared to give them direction because you don't want them not to like you. It's all about you. You're scared to walk out the door, tell somebody and say, you know that guy Roxanne, she's stupid. That guy Russell, she's stupid. It means that you're so worried about what other people think about you that you don't want to be tough on people when they need to be tough. You love them when they need to be loved, but some people need to hear, some guys with 20, 30 years, when they come up to you and start whining about whatever the hell they're whining about, you need to tell them, you know, how old are you? 40 years? 40 years old. Let me ask you something, Bob. When the fuck are you going to grow up? Some men need to hear about growing the hell up. Some women who come in to see you and say, well, at least I'm a good mother, need to hear you say, you know something, you're a shitty mother. Is that what you tell yourself to make yourself feel good? My mother was an alcoholic. You choose booze over your kids. You're a crappy mother. Is that what you tell yourself to make yourself feel good? So you somehow feel good? Well, let me tell you something. I had a mother like you. You don't give a crap about your kids. That's the stuff you tell yourself to make yourself. Some people need to hear the truth sometimes. And the fact that you can't tell them the truth has not, even though you know that's the truth, but you can't say it, is because you are more worried about yourself and whether somebody will like you than saving somebody's life. Because I'm going to tell you something, the chief characteristic of every alcoholic is defiance. And sometimes, I don't know whether you ever know this, but if you sponsor a few hundreds or 1,000 people, if you sponsor people, you realize every once in a while as you're talking to them that they're not listening to you. No, I trust me. You can talk to an alcoholic, say the same thing 5 times, and at the end of talking to him, and you'll say, did you hear anything I said? He said, yeah, I heard anything. So what was the last thing I said to you? I said, I don't know, I can't remember. They're not listening to you. As you're talking, they're already thinking you're full of shit or what they're going to say or something like. Many times, and when they come to you, they act like they're asking you a question, right? You actually think they care about what you have to say. They don't want to get well. They just want attention. And you start talking, and before you finish your sentence, they interrupt you. Say, well, no, you don't understand. I've been told, I mean, how can I go for this long a time and never understand anything? I've been told so many times I don't understand by people that are telling me their problem because they don't understand it. They come to me seemingly because they want to know what their problem is. And before I even finish the first line of the first sentence, they said, no, you don't understand. I say, like, well, why are you talking to me? I mean, obviously I don't understand, and obviously you do understand, so just do what you want to do. He says, will you sponsor me? He says, yeah. He says, let me tell you what my problem is. Oh, you're going to tell me what your problem is. He says, well, yeah, blah, 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 blah. He says, I think I got to start at the first step and the second and the third step. Well, wait a second. Didn't you do the first step? Well, he says, yeah. Well, didn't you do the fourth step? He says, yeah. Well, you were sober 5 years. Didn't you do all these steps? He says, yeah, I did them all. I said, but you drank. He said, yeah. I said, so you just want to do the steps over again that you are already willing to do? He said, well, yeah. He says, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we try to figure out the steps that you didn't do? Maybe it's not what you did. Maybe it's what you didn't do. Did you go to Bible study? Did you pray to God? Did you hang around people that believed in God? Well, no, because, that's not my program. I said, well, maybe I'm not the guy for you. Maybe you just thought, why don't you just keep on doing what you did when you drank? I'm sure that'll work for you this time. You get it? I mean, this may not be making any sense to you. Alcoholics are very, very sick people. They'd love for you to let them just continue to do what they've been doing and get sicker and sicker and sicker. And then they can say, it's my sponsor's fault. It's AA's fault. I went to AA. I did all that. It didn't work. And they can say because they're different and they're unique, And so the bottom line is that this disease, this idea of worrying about what other people think about you, being so self-absorbed and everything like that you're not willing to put yourself and yourself on the line. You're not willing to even have somebody reject you. Let me tell you something. You may think this is weird. I told the gal one day when she came to see me that exact same thing. I said, you're a crappy mother. You're a terrible mother. And I feel sorry. I don't feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for your kids. You know what she did? She got out of my office. She said, I didn't come here to hear that shit. You know what I mean? I don't need that crap from somebody like you. And she walked out the door. And then 15 minutes later, my secretary said, that gal is on the phone. And I said, yeah. She said, can I come back? I said, sure. And she's sober today. I mean, you got to understand, once you start understanding alcoholics, understanding yourself, you start understanding alcoholics. You got somebody that pisses you off and tells you shit let me tell you something, you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps the loudest is the one that gets hit. You find somebody that's telling you shit that you don't want to hear, let me tell you, we have a spiritual axiom. Whenever you're upset, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong. You try to find people that are saying shit that upsets you. You find, because something, if you don't deal with the stuff that upsets you, there's nothing that's going to go on in here that somebody's going to say in here that's as bad as what you're going to get out there. If you don't learn how to be unupsettable by some of the stuff you're hearing there, they're going to kill you out there. Because out there, they really don't give a shit. It's going to be much rougher out there. So to me, that's the first step. The first step, once you stop drinking, that's when you deal with the real first step. Realizing you're powerless over your sick mind and instincts and the way you are and your brain. This idea that now that you're sober and you can use your brain and think well and do okay, as long as you're not drinking, that's when the disease has a party going on. That's when the party starts, that's the deal. So thank you very much.